of the questions that haunted me during my 25 years of atheism is, if God loves us, why does he leave so much room for doubt? I think the answer will surprise you. It did me. If God wanted belief to be easy, he could have made it certain. So why does faith feel more like a question than an answer? If God exists, and if the Bible is in any meaningful sense inspired, then one question refuses to go away. Why isn't it clearer? Why isn't the Bible unambiguous, systematic, and airtight? Why doesn't it read like an instruction manual? Why are there arguments, denominations, disagreements, centuries of debate? If God wanted certainty, he could have had it. So maybe the uncertainty isn't a flaw. Maybe it's the point. For most of my life, I assumed uncertainty in the Bible was evidence against God. If God were real, surely he would have communicated clearly, especially about something as important as salvation. But the more I thought about it, the more that assumption started to fall apart. Because clarity isn't always loving, and certainty isn't always good. In engineering, we learned something early on. The more tightly you constrain a system, the less freedom it has to adapt. Over-optimization makes systems brittle. They stop responding intelligently and start behaving mechanically. Human relationships work the same way. Think about it. If someone handed you a perfect checklist for love, exact steps, exact words, exact behaviors, you wouldn't be in a relationship. You'd be running a script. Certainty allows apathy to grow. When everything is spelled out, the hard work disappears. You no longer need to wrestle, reflect, or ask yourself what love requires here and now. You just check boxes. And if salvation worked that way, if God handed us a clean, unambiguous formula, then faith wouldn't be rational. It would be transactional. Do X, avoid Y, receive reward. But that doesn't look anything like love. Love requires risk. Love requires interpretation. Love requires freedom, and freedom requires uncertainty. If God wanted obedience alone, he could have made robots. If God wanted compliance, he could have removed ambiguity. If God wanted certainty, he could have made belief unavoidable. But unavoidable belief isn't faith, and compelled obedience isn't love. So what if the uncertainty in the Bible isn't evidence of God's absence, but evidence of his restraint? What if God refuses to overwhelm us with certainty because certainty would limit our freedom? Think of it, about what certainty actually does. When you are absolutely certain you are right, you stop listening. You stop questioning. You stop growing. Certainty closes the conversation. Uncertainty keeps it open. And relationships only exist where conversation remains possible. If the Bible told us exactly which boxes to check for salvation, precise doctrines, precise rituals, precise beliefs, then moral and spiritual life would collapse into rule following. We wouldn't need wisdom. We wouldn't need conscience. We wouldn't need love. We would just need accuracy. But accuracy isn't the same thing as goodness. The most troubling moments in religious history didn't come from doubt. They came from certainty, from people who were sure they knew exactly what God wanted and felt justified imposing it on others. Certainty narrows moral imagination. It replaces responsibility with permission, and that's dangerous. So maybe God does something radically different. Maybe instead of giving us certainty, he gives us stories. Stories that force us to interpret, stories that confront us with moral tension, stories that require us to ask, what does love look like here? Stories that don't let us outsource our responsibility, because the answer isn't obvious. You have to decide who you're becoming. Uncertainty doesn't eliminate morality, it intensifies it. And that's where relationship lives. I don't believe God intended salvation to be a scavenger hunt for correct beliefs. If salvation were about checking the right intellectual boxes, then the smartest, most educated people would have the greatest advantage. That doesn't look like justice, and it certainly doesn't look like love. Instead, what if salvation is about orientation rather than information? About whether we are open, honest, humble, and responsive to truth as we encounter it. That would explain why certainty is absent, because certainty short-circuits relationship. It replaces trust with control, and love can't exist where control dominates. This reframes doubt entirely. Doubt isn't rebellion, doubt isn't failure, doubt is the cost of freedom, and freedom is the condition for love. If God exists and desires relationship rather than compliance, then uncertainty isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. It forces us to wrestle. It forces us to listen. It forces us to take responsibility for our moral choices rather than hiding behind rules. It keeps faith from becoming mechanical. It keeps God from becoming an object, and it keeps us from becoming certain enough to stop caring. So when I look at the Bible now, I no longer ask, why isn't this clear? I ask, what kind of God would choose to speak this way? And the answer that keeps coming back is this: a God who values love more than control, a God who values relationship more than compliance, a God who values freedom more than certainty. That kind of God would allow ambiguity, not to confuse us, but to invite us, not to trap us, but to respect us, not to make belief easy, but to make love possible. If you struggle with uncertainty, if you've been told your questions disqualify you, I don't believe that's how God sees it. I think uncertainty may be the space where faith actually begins. Not faith as certainty, but faith as trust. Not faith as answers, but faith as response. And if God exists, I suspect he would rather have honest seekers than perfect, certain followers. Because certainty doesn't love, people do. If you're still thinking about this after the episode ends, you're exactly who this channel is for. Subscribe, and let's keep the conversation going. Hit me with any questions that you have in the comments below. And until next time, I appreciate you watching.